Want to tell you today what I learned recently playing Rummy at my house, a Rummy game. Marion and I were playing with Bob Malsbury, who lives with us, and we were playing a game of Rummy as we do every now and then, sort of keeping a tournament going. And I had played a card, and Marion asked me, "Why did you play that card when you could have played it on a different place on your piles?" And I said, "Now, I am somewhat competitive. I tend to like to do the strategy side of things, but I have learned that what I interpret as strategic can be viewed as ruthless or maniacal by my game partners. So I gently said, well, I knew if I played the card there, neither of you would be able to play your cards and get points off of that. Ominous silence resulted. Uh-oh. I knew now I was again in danger of being viewed as the rummy assassin. So I attempted to explain why this was not cruel to do this. I said, think of a football game. In a football game, you have the offensive side of the ball, and they're trying to get down and score as many points as they can. But on the other hand, you also have the defensive squad, which comes on, and they're trying to stop the other guys from scoring. So in a game, you need both offense to score, but you also need defense to stop the other team from scoring. I thought this was very poignant and telling, but there were definitely heads being shaken disapprovingly. Feeling a little challenged, and maybe that was partly because that was Marion's birthday night that we were playing the game. I felt I needed to explain a little more. And I said, well, actually, it wasn't just defensive. It wasn't just to stop you guys from scoring. I also knew that you might play your 10 that I was hoping that one of you might have, and I was hoping you would hold on to that and then throw it into the discard pile because then later I could pick it off the discard pile because I had two tens and then I could play a trio of tens down. At this point, I'm positive I heard the word maniac, and how do you even think like that coming from the table? And I was reminded that playing rummy, that we look at life differently. I do look at life strategically. I don't do it on purpose. I can't help it. The other players don't tend to do that. So here we are today, and life is chaotic. We don't know what's ahead. We don't know where things are going or what's going to happen. That some people desperately need and want to have everything get open as soon as possible. Some people don't want things to open. We're coming out of the COVID-19 eventually, and it's going to require strategic thinking and planning. And in unsettled times, chaotic times, times with many, many questions and many unknowns, it can seem that the strategic thinkers, the planners, will have an easier time. I mean, let everyone else give way to fear and anxiety and panic disorders. I'll think my way through this thing. But of course, it doesn't. It doesn't work that way. Fear is non-discriminatory. It impacts everybody. In some ways, seeing the issues can be more unsettling and confusing because you see how many hurdles and unanswered questions there are as a strategic thinker. Last week, I was struggling with fear. There's one particular day. The more questions and issues I raised, the less I felt capable of dealing with them. God led me to Psalm 34 and led me in a very beautiful way to the psalm. Now, it was written by David, and David, of course, was a general and he was a king. I mean, David was a strategist, a great planner. But David was overwhelmed by fear in the events that were going on when he wrote Psalm 34. He even gives the historic context at the beginning of the psalm. He speaks to people in Psalm 34 that are afraid. And he starts out in verse 2 and he says, listen. And he says, let the afflicted listen and be glad. He says, listen to what I'm going to say if you're struggling with fear. And then he says, I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. He says, he saved me out of all my troubles. And then he gives the key that he experienced. And he says it basically in bold-faced capital letters. He says, fear the Lord. For those who fear him, he says, lack nothing. Now, fearing the Lord means to be in awe of God, that he becomes the biggest reality in our life at that time. And then he says, in later verses after that, he says, listen, I will teach you about fearing the Lord. And then he says, why? He says, because the righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. He says the key in fear is fearing God, being awed by God. It is something that is needed by everyone in this unsettled time. You may be a spontaneous person who lives in the moment, not naturally a planner or a strategist, but fear will find you. When you are struck with complex questions you don't feel the resources to naturally deal with, or you may be a planner, a strategist, but you may find that your very ability to assess the situation just reminds you how limited you are to resolve the tangled web of challenges before you. And fear finds you. We need to be awed by God, the personal, powerful God of life. We need to replace awe with fear. Excuse me. We need to replace fear with awe. I did that to see if you were still listening. No matter how we play rummy, no matter how we are wired, we need to replace fear with awe. Thanks, guys.